What's up guys, welcome back to On the Brick with another custom LEGO review. Today I have for you a set that I have been wanting since I first saw it over 10 years ago. This is easily one of the most iconic ships in Star Wars and definitely of the prequel trilogy. This is the UCS Venator Republic Attack Cruiser by Anio. This set is said to contain 5,454 pieces, but I had to make several modifications to mine, mainly for support, so mine's actually a little higher than that. And with that many pieces, needless to say, this set is big. It's 43 inches long, 15 inches high, and at its widest is 22 inches. So if you're going to get this, make sure you have a proper place to display it. I actually had to buy a brand new shelf just for this. And as always, you can find the instructions in the description down below. But is it worth it? I finished this set over the course of about 3 days with the building time of around 20 hours. And thankfully, having wanted this set for so long, I went into it knowing what modifications I wanted to make, meaning I had already prepared myself for those changes. So let's go back to the beginning and see how this thing comes together. To no surprise, one of the first things you build in this set is the Technic frame. One of the first and easiest modifications I made is by adding these extra Technic gray pieces onto the axle in order to help it not fall out. In fact, this axle isn't actually needed for quite some time, and it probably would have made more sense to include it later. Another area to keep an eye out for are the hinges on each side here. They are only connected by one stud, not two, which is a little difficult to see in the instructions, and also when you first place them, they have you doing so parallel to the Technic beam, but you actually want to put them perpendicular to it to be able to achieve these angles. Overall, this part was fairly quick to put together, and I had no real issues with it. The next thing you do is build the hangar bays and the side greebling. And even though I've seen other people have issues with this part, I personally didn't have any. The pieces lined up fine for me, and even in later steps they did not get in the way. But one thing I would highly recommend is to build some support bases like I have here with these black bricks, as you will be picking this thing up and moving it around a few times, and just to make sure nothing falls off, you really want to have something like that. After that comes one of the more boring parts of this build, as all you are working on is greebling. In fact, you're really just repeating the same build 12 times. It didn't take too long to do at all though, and I think the end result looks fine. Now the fourth step is one of the bigger steps as you work on the red stripe for the underneath of the hull. When it comes to this section, there are two very important things to keep in mind. The first is that it does not connect to the actual build until the next part, and the second is that to help fill in the gaps a little bit more, I did add in 1x8 light bluish plates down the entirety of this strip. And if you want to do the same, make sure you get a 1x10 or a 1x2 to fill in the gap at the very front, as that is a 1x10 space instead of 1x8 like the rest of the strip. Really quickly, I want to point out that the instructions I used show that you did the top panel in the next part. That's not true, it's the part after that. It's not until the next part that you actually connect this to the ship, and alongside that you actually build a stand as well, meaning that if you do choose to make those brick supports, you will no longer need them. The base does slide through those holes in the bottom panel that you just saw, and you finally make use of that Technic axle up front. One thing to keep in mind during this part of the build is that you will have to take apart earlier sections in order to get the base in. Thankfully, it's nothing too bad, but again, it would have made more sense to put the base in first and then these sections. The second thing to keep in mind is that if you see here above those red pins on the right, there are two black Technic parts. Make sure that those only have one gap between them, because they will align with the base and allow you to connect them with some long Technic pins. At this point I took a quick break because it was my birthday and I had received a blind bag minifigure, so I opened him up and I have absolutely no idea who this guy is. I know it's a Clone Army Customs, but I reached out to him and got no response, so if you know who this is, please let me know in the comments down below. Finally, you do actually add the red stripe on top and a little bit of extra as well, as you can see. Also make sure that you get this axle in right, it will help a lot. And also make sure that you get these magnets sticking up like this. It doesn't matter so much now, but when you're putting the panels on, it will make a difference. Also, just like the underside, I did extend each side of the red stripe by one all the way down. However, this time I did it with the dark red pieces. And just to clarify, I extended it by one plate using 1x8 plates all the way down and 1x10 plate at the very end. Now, I really wanted to move on, however, my cat decided that he needed my arm to sleep on, so unfortunately I had to wait before moving on to build the engines. Now, this is a part that you definitely want to look into before you build. Now, there are a few issues here that could hamper your progress, but nothing too extreme. One thing that I really would like to know, though, from anyone else who has built this set is, did they have this issue with the engines? Because I was never able to fix this. No matter what I tried, these just never went in properly, and short of having to rebuild the entire engine, which was not something I was willing to do, I exhausted every option. Thankfully, it doesn't seem like it was that necessary, as the engines have been staying perfectly fine. Also, you'll notice that I added tiles on every other part of the engines. That is because the slopes at the end are only connected by a single pin, so by adding those tiles just made the connection stronger so that they wouldn't fall off. You then continue building in the back, and actually building this didn't take too long, but unfortunately I wasn't able to move on so quickly because I had a lot of issues with this. The underside of this build continued to fall off, and it also knocked off these parts back here. Now, the footage you're seeing is from a video I'm going to talk about later, but I don't have these parts on my set anymore because I don't think they're actually that necessary. They just continue to either fall off or be in the way. You never really build onto them again, and I just don't really know why they're there. Now, moving back to my footage, you can see another issue I had where the weight of this was so much it was actually lifting it off the rest of the build. When you add the next section on, it does help a little bit. It still has issues that we'll go into, but I went ahead and added a 1x2 tile connecting those two parts there that you can see being separated, and that did help a lot. The next part you build is the bridge and the comm tower. It did take a little bit of time to actually put together, but that's mainly because of the size and the details that you're working on. Now, adding it onto the main build did help a little bit with the back, but it had a similar problem on the opposite side. As you can see, this part is being lifted up, so I just added in a 2x2 brick into the gap there to help stop that from happening. Also, on the actual bridge parts where there's this 1x1 slope, I added in 2 plates on top of it to stop it from spinning around. Unfortunately, you can see that the back was still not fully connected, so I did add in a few extra plates just to give it that extra little bit of support. But I haven't had any issues since then after doing this and finishing this section. And then came the panels. And I'll be honest, this is part of the reason why I haven't gotten the new UCS Star Destroyer and why I'm a little hesitant to get either the Monarch or the Executor. LEGO panels have never been kind to me, because for some reason, they're never really given enough support. So the biggest thing you'll see here is that I had to go through and add in a lot of extra pieces to stop these things from falling apart. Now, I haven't seen other people have this issue really, so maybe it's not something that you'll have to worry about too much, but for me, I just didn't want to struggle with them every time I moved them around. Also, I did add a bunch of extra dark gray pieces here to help fill in this gap, and they do really make a difference later on. Building the actual panels did take a few hours, but putting them on was incredibly easy. And when you're done with the bottom panels, you're going to move on to the only thing that's left, which is of course the top panels. These do take more time as there are more details, and there are a few things to keep note of here as well. So you can see here that adding those extra plates onto the red stripe does help fill in this gap a lot. One thing I did as well is add an extra row to the Republic symbol here, which made it more symmetrical and allowed it to actually fit into that slot without moving around. You're going to want to change how the guns are. The build has them move around a little too much, and for me personally, just adding these top panels on really does start to make this look really cool. I know I briefly mentioned this earlier, but when it comes to these magnets, you want to have them lifted up and at an angle so that you can get the panels on correctly. I know this sounds kind of obvious, but they're actually meant to be laying down at an angle, and when I was putting them on, it felt wrong, but it ended up being the correct way. And finally, you put both panels on, and this beast of a set is finally complete, and it looks great. So after waiting years to get this thing, was it worth it? Yeah, absolutely. This is one of the most iconic ships from Star Wars and one of my favorite. The design of this set was very well done. There weren't really any parts that caused frustration. Even the back that was a little troublesome ended up being okay. That frustration level goes way down if you go into this knowing you're going to need to do modifications. So if you're a fan of the prequel trilogy, of Star Wars, of cool ships, of the Venator, or just UCS sets, I would highly recommend this one. It is incredibly worth it and very well done. Now I do keep talking about modifications and saying how I knew I would have to do them before coming into it, and that all has to do with that brief clip from the video I showed you earlier. It's also the same reason why I didn't spend too much time talking about each individual section. Now that video is by a guy called Studs McSnap, which is an awesome name, and if you've looked at anything in relation to the UCS Venator, you've probably seen his video already. He does an incredible step-by-step breakdown of this thing, talking about all the modifications that need to be made or are recommended to be made. And so if you take my recommendation and get this set, make sure you watch that video before you build so you know what extra pieces you're going to need, and then as you're building so you can remind yourself during each step what to do. It will save you a lot of time and really make this thing look so much better. Because I'm really happy with this and I love seeing it out there on display next to my Falcon. But what are your thoughts on this set? Should LEGO have made a UCS Venator? Because that's the reason I got this set. And if you know a fix to those engines, please let me know because I would like to if it's easy. So thank you for watching another one of my videos. If you're new here, I do a lot of custom LEGO between sets and minifigures, so subscribe if you want to see more of that, and ring the bell if you want to know anytime that I upload. So thank you again for watching, and if all goes well tomorrow, I'll have a special non-Star Wars video on Friday. And if you want to see what that is, I'll see you then.